Season 2 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Carl Haley and Daniel Murphy. We're not sitting very far from 82nd Avenue, which you mentioned just a bit earlier before recording. You go past it east and you start getting weird crime. What is the weird crime of Portland you start seeing when you go east of 82nd Street?
Well, I just mean, like any city, any big city, there's going to be areas that are maybe a little bit more, how do you say, like on the white trash side of things, like...
I grew up in Seattle. I know what happens when you go east.
Yeah, so I think once you, if you looked at each city's grid and checked out their crime reports and would sort of break down like where the most crime happens, and in Portland, it ranges from like there's gang stuff that happens, but there's also murder and there's robberies and there seems to be a lot of meth activities too.
Right.
I would assume that if you went past 82nd, you'd probably see a lot more meth activity than you would, as far as 82nd to downtown.
It's Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, sitting here in the Montavilla neighborhood of Portland, Oregon, speaking with Kevin Sampsell, the publisher of Future Tense Books, the author of the memoir A Common Pornography. He's also written another novel. He's just finished writing another novel, but he's also the editor of a couple of books, including Portland Noir and The Insomniac Reader, and the author of a couple short story collections, Creamy Bullets and A Beautiful Blemish. And I want to ask, can you draw on Can you draw much on the weird crime or the atmosphere of weirdness or criminality that you find at the edges of Portland when you're getting ideas, when you're getting literary inspiration?
Well, a good example of that would be I don't necessarily dwell on it with my own writing. I don't write a lot about criminal stuff. And I only set stuff in Portland occasionally. It's not like I always kind of felt weird about setting my own writing in the town that you live in. I think I've gotten to a point where I actually think it's pretty fun to read stuff like that when people are writing about the city that they live in. So I think I have an appreciation for that now. But when I was working on the Portland Noir anthology, that was a really big thing that I had to consciously direct people to do when I had asked people to write stories for the anthology or asked people to contribute. And so, if you've looked at that noir series that Akashic publishes, they have it in all these different cities around the world, and each anthology, each story is supposed to sort of be in a different neighborhood or a different part of that town. So that's when I started to, I think that's probably where I really started to kind of earn my appreciation for it. Like, oh, that would be cool to have this person write about this neighborhood or this person to write about that neighborhood. And so that was a really fun project because we were able to put the personality or the sort of the quirks or whatever of these different parts of Portland into these stories, as a backdrop or, as like a sort of a character in some of these stories in that anthology. I think there was, I don't think there was really any stories in that anthology that took place past 82nd Avenue, but there was one that does take place on 82nd Avenue, like at a hotel and a diner on 82nd Avenue, and that's one of my favorite stories in that anthology. But
you get past 82nd, too grim for noir at that point.
Yeah, and some people would even argue that it's not even like Portland proper. It gets into these different little parts of Portland, like Gresham or Tigard or Beaverton is out the opposite direction. Those are sort of the more suburban areas.
The greater Portland area, though, nonetheless, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's still Portland, and I know people that live in those areas, but
even before you were thinking directly about Portland writing, you of course you've been living here. You've been here 20 years. There's a sense in which you sort of draw from the Portlandness, do you not?
Yeah, and I think that's emerged more and more, not just with my stuff, but with other people in Portland, other Portland writers and Portland artists and filmmakers and musicians and stuff like that. People drawing more and more on Portland's oddness, or everything from like Portlandia to like Matthew Dickman's poetry, which is he's a good example of someone who uses a lot of Portland references in his work, and he also grew up in a part of town called Lentz, which is sort of in this area, in that, and also in that what we're calling the beyond 82nd Avenue, sort of area. It's a little bit more, maybe like a little more rough and tumble, and not as friendly and PC as inner Portland.
Now, your memoir, A Common Pornography, you write about growing up in the Tri-Cities of Washington State, and I grew up in Seattle. Kennewick, Pasco, and a third one whose name I always forget. Richland, yes. But you write about growing up there, and they always seemed, those cities, so distant to me as a kid. And I wonder, as a kid there in the Tri-Cities, what did sort of Seattle or even Portland seem like from that vantage point? Which one? I don't even know which city is closer.
Well, yeah, I think they're about the same. Well, actually, I think Seattle might be a little bit closer. You'd be driving southwest when you're coming to Portland from the Tri-Cities. Everyone had a very sort of mythological, not mythological, but sort of this mythical kind of idea of Seattle, and it was the big city. It was on the other side of the state. You had to drive, if you came from the Tri-Cities to Seattle in the wintertime, you'd have to drive over the mountain passes, which were snowy and sometimes treacherous, and I don't really remember people talking about Portland that much back then. I think in the 80s, Portland was still sort of, maybe, I could be wrong, but Portland was still sort of seen as maybe not like a big city like Seattle. It was more like, I don't know. I never thought of it as like a real city until, shortly before I moved here, And even when I moved here, it still had a sense of being kind of like a small city, and I don't know what the statistics are, but it's obviously grown and ballooned, got more cramped, in the past 20 years. More people coming here, more people aware of it. That's it seems like it's grown a lot in the past 20 years.
In the late 80s, even Seattle was sort of pretty cool. It was before it had gotten into the zeitgeist, generally speaking, as a fun place to go, or as an exciting place to go. What was Portland then, right before you came here? I mean, what was bringing you here, and what did it seem like you were going as a writer at that time?
Well, I moved here in '92, and I was actually moving here from Arkansas. I lived in Fort Smith, Arkansas for a year, and I had lived in Seattle and Spokane before I moved to Arkansas. I lived in Spokane for like 3 years. I lived in Seattle for a year. And so I tried out a couple of other places in Washington. I really didn't like Spokane when I first moved there. I started to like it more, before I left.
It's not deserving of its looked down upon reputation, you think?
I actually like Spokane much more now than I did. Like, whenever I don't go there very often, but the times I go there now, it really does seem like a nice little city or a nice big town. Much nicer than the Tri-Cities, which, they're just depressing to me now when I go back. But I do like Seattle too. And like I said, I lived there for a year. I liked it. I had a lot of fun there. I didn't really meet a lot of people there, and it didn't seem like the friendliest city. And so when I was moving out of Arkansas and I had my Arkansas girlfriend come with me, we were trying to figure out places to live, and we were thinking about moving to the East Coast, and we did a road trip and we drove around the East Coast in New York and DC and Philadelphia and Baltimore and stuff, and we liked those places and it was fun, but we thought it was too cramped or too crowded. So we decided to move to the Northwest, and I didn't really want to live in Seattle again. I didn't want to go back to Spokane or Tri-Cities because I was past it, I guess, or I had already done it. I just wanted something new. I'd only been to Portland like once or twice before I decided to move here. But one of the reasons was, coming here and like going to Powell's and like, I was really starting to get into reading and writing a lot more at that point.
You had a semi-unusual path into writing, did you not? Or do you consider it to be that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it was just sort of like a weird kind of meandery, kind of accidental sort of thing. It was just, as far as writing goes, I mean, I was always like goofing around and writing and stuff as a kid. Everything from like, cheesy pop songs, as a preteen, to like goofing around with my high school friend and writing like, just sort of jokey, kind of like Henry Rollins poetry ripoffs, and just trying to like entertain ourselves and make each other laugh. And it just kind of came from that, really. And then as I started to read more, I started to like take it a little more seriously, or at least I started to at least shape my own ideas about what I wanted to do and what things I wanted to try out as a writer, and I tried to challenge myself to write certain things, so it was a little unconventional in a way that it started off originally as just a really naive kind of thing. But it became a lot more deliberate, after I got the reading bug, after I became such a fan of reading and books. It was like, I just surrounded myself with books and reading. I wanted to meet other writers. And it wasn't until I moved to Portland that I started meeting other writers. And, I could, say that too in regards to the last question, like when I got to Portland, as opposed to like Seattle and places like that. Like I had moved to Portland because I wanted to try someplace new and because Powell's was here, and I was excited about that because I was excited about books and I was excited about going shopping there and and all that stuff. The thing I didn't really know when I moved here was I didn't really ask around. I only knew like one or two people here before I moved here. I didn't really ask them like, are there poetry readings? Are there, like who lives there, and like do people, write and publish stuff? I just moved here and I was doing it myself and would slowly meet other people and I was just kind of doing it myself. A lot of people came up to me and wanted me to like tell them like how do you publish your own books and stuff like that. And it's like, it wasn't like I had like some beautiful, printing press or anything. I was doing everything at Kinko's and cutting and pasting stuff, and but I was creating stuff, and I guess that's probably what made people interested in me initially, and that's how I met a lot of other writers. They are interested in my, in my creativity, I guess.
And your founding of Future Tense Books predates you being in Portland, right? By a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, I started. The thing about Future Tense though was like when it started, I can never really it's hard for me to say like, oh, future tense has been around since 1990 or whatever. I mean, it has, but like the first couple of years was basically just me, like, making my own little, lo-fi chapbooks and
complete DIY.
Yeah, and with no real audience in mind either. I was just kind of doing it for myself, and I had like a couple of friends that got a kick out of stuff I was writing, and so I would just kind of do stuff for me and my friends, and I was okay with it. I mean, I didn't know it was going to last for a long time. I didn't know I was going to start publishing other people's stuff, or that people would take it seriously at all. All of that came, like I said, after I moved to Portland, met other writers, started publishing their books, and and I was meeting people who were putting out, writing really good stuff. So the quality of the stuff I was publishing by other people was really getting better too, and I was learning as I went along, and I don't know, it's a weird thing, I think, when you're young and you do things and you're just kind of doing them for yourself and you don't really care, and then like you get to a point where you start caring a little more. Not that I didn't care, but like you're just doing it for fun, and then you start to care more, and you put more thought into it, and you realize that other people that you don't know are looking at what you're creating, right. and then you have to consider that, a little bit, but I think that helps,
So in some sense, it gets away from you, your attitude, I'm not going to care too much about this, and then the thing grows, and it's, oh, well, there it is now, and I'm responsible for it. I see.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of nonchalance that you can have with the stuff that you're creating, and if you can have an audience, and if people are interested in what you're doing, and you can still maintain that sort of nonchalance, or that sort of like, because I think that sort of that whatever you want to call it, that naivete or that nonchalance, or that sort of like not giving a crap, it's sure, like sure. You're able to forge a voice that's unique and interesting for people, and that's what really sometimes when people are looking for interesting stuff to read, that's why some of these like small press things and like some of these self-published things, I mean, a lot of it isn't very good, but some of it is like so good because there's, they're just doing it, and they don't have, like a board of editors and stuff, right, going through it saying like, well, this is this doesn't make sense, or this is going to offend this person, or there's a real like freedom, a real freedom.
How much do you think the sort of obscure rigors of that, of working at a small scale for a long time, publishing your own stuff, having to go to Kinko's, how much effect did that have on the voice you would go on to develop? Just that whole process of like, well, maybe I'll write this for nobody, but I'm still going to do it. And maybe this time I'll do it this way. And this time, I didn't like how that turned out. I mean, that process, how much of that is responsible for the voice we would read in A Common Pornography or in the next book that you will have out?
As far as like my own writing goes, you mean?
Exactly, yeah. When it's your own writing, or, I mean, to have a full perspective here, the writing that you have wanted to publish through Future Tense.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, there's a couple of, those are two different kinds of things. Like with the Future Tense stuff, I put out a lot of stuff on Future Tense that like went nowhere, like stuff by people I really liked, and maybe they had a couple of fans, but there was a lot of stuff that I published that that didn't really catch on fire like I would hope it would. But when I started to publish people's books that did do well, then it kind of showed me like, oh, that's really rewarding. It's so much more rewarding. I'm trying not to phrase this wrong, but it's kind of it's rewarding to like put out something that a lot of people really get into and relate to. And I mean, basically it all comes down to like what I love as a publisher, and I love all the books that I've done, but sometimes like I'm one of the few people who love it, and then there are other times when there's like a lot of people that love it, and that's really rewarding for me. And it also makes me feel good for the writer that I'm able to put out that stuff for them and get it out there and give them an audience.
What are some of the times that you have put a book out and you've been surprised? Like, I know I knew I loved it, but other people do too? Okay, cool. But wow.
I mean, there's been a lot of stuff in the last, like, 10 years or, probably like a lot of stuff in the last 10 years that have really, that's really done well, that has taken me a little by surprise, I guess. The Zoe Trope chapbook that we published, Please Don't Kill the Freshmen, I mean, that was really like our first really big hit, there was a great story behind it. She was a high school girl writing about her experience, and I hadn't really published anything like that before, and so it was really interesting to publish something that was kind of new and different for me, and to have such a big response to it. And it was really like a word of mouth sort of thing. It was really crazy how popular that book became pretty quickly. And then, of course, we sold it to HarperCollins, and she wrote a longer version for them. And we've had a couple of other books that have been like that. There's other writers that I really like a lot that whose books have done really well for me, and I feel like I don't want to like take too much credit, but I feel like a lot of times when I publish a book by somebody, it gets their name out there more, and more people are a lot more people are aware of them, and so I'm really proud that I'm able to like publish people like Chelsea Martin is another person. I published her first book, and that's just like a crazy, weird book of just like a lot of fun stuff, just kind of like thrown together in a book. It's like stories and lists and like drawings, and it's just this crazy book. But so many people really love that book, and she's published a couple of other little things since then, and it was really great to sort of help launch her name and her work out there in the world more. And Chloe Caldwell, who I published earlier this year, I feel like not a lot of people were really that aware of her work until her book was coming out, and that book has gotten so much attention that she's sort of like a small press superstar now. Like everyone, not everyone, but I mean a lot of people knows her name, and she's gotten a lot of attention for that. As far as my own stuff goes, and the way I've written and what the response has been and how it's shaped my writing, it's my writing has stayed fairly consistent, like as far as like the content goes. I always kind of go for stuff that's accessible but a little strange, and like has some sort of story that can become comical at times. I mean, that's what I'm sort of hoping for with my work, and I think just throughout the years, obviously when you write for a long time, your writing becomes a little sharper, and you just kind of it just gets into better shape. It's like exercising. You can maybe start out a little flabby, but then maybe hopefully after 20 years, like you're in a little better shape, and you have more muscle tone, or so
it's like a form of a martial art.
Yeah. And there's just as much thinking and meditating on it involved with writing as like a martial art, probably.
You mentioned, of course, Powell's City of Books in Portland, the famous bookstore. As a friend of mine said, Powell's is what Portland is for. And then you mentioned its importance to you. That's the place where you became a serious reader?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably before that, maybe like a couple of years before I moved here, is when I started to really start reading a lot more. And even when I lived in Arkansas, there was a couple of used bookstores there that I would go to and get stuff. And I was really, it was an interesting kind of way of self-educating myself about books and writing, because I went to community college for 1 year, and I'd never really taken writing classes that much or literature classes. So I was sort of just trying to teach myself through, kind of picking out things that I would think was interesting, or think that, I would read stuff sometimes because I would hear references to it, and I was like, oh, I should probably read that Kafka book or Sylvia Plath or Dostoevsky or whatever. And so I read, stuff like that. I have a ton of holes in my writing, or in my,
we all do,
in my reading life, I'm sure, but it was really fun to become more and more of a reader, and it was just really exciting, because when you're first starting to get into it, there's so many paths that you can go down, so many directions, and you go down certain paths, like the beats, or the band books, or the New York writers or whoever. And so moving to Powell's, that was definitely a big boost to my reading life, because you have almost anything imaginable that you can get into, so
it's a city of books, after all.
Yeah, and it's, you can find obscure stuff, and friends can tell you to read something, and maybe it's a book that you wouldn't find anywhere else, but they have it there. And
right. I have gone to Powell's every day of this visit, and every day of every Portland visit I make, and I'll be going every day of this visit that remains. But who were you pulling off the shelves that you found particularly instructive for you? Whether or not you found them entertaining, maybe it's one and the same. But who did you find you were really learning a lot about writing from reading?
That's a good question. I think I would gravitate toward people that I was trying to, maybe not, I wasn't really like trying to write like certain people, but I was gravitating toward people who would do interesting things with their writing, or kind of break rules or whatever. So people like Mark Lehner, I was really, really into his stuff. He was really funny. Other people, like even people like Raymond Carver, who I remember, somebody recommending it to me, I think, and I picked up a copy of his book, Cathedral, I think it was the first book I read of his. And I remember enjoying it, but at the same time, it was strange. My reaction to it was like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. I think it was because it was so minimal and so like, it's so straightforward and stuff. For a while, I didn't feel like I had really liked it a lot. And but then after I had finished it, though, I would find myself thinking about certain stories, and that was kind of a lesson for me. Like, oh, maybe I did like that book more. Like it had some sort of effect on me, where I would think about these characters or these stories. And then I would read more, and I went back and read more of his stuff and really liked it.
It's like one of those books or one of those writers, like many people who you meet and you kind of forget them, and then you're like, well, they are coming to mind a lot. Maybe there's something there,
Yeah, and then another, like-minded type writing was a lot of Southern writers that I liked, who are also, for the most part, a lot of the Southern writers I liked were ones that wrote in very straightforward in a very straightforward fashion. People like Larry Brown, Harry Crews, even though his stuff is sort of bizarre at times. But mainly people like Larry Brown, Flannery O'Connor, Barry Hanna. Those were people that I read, and even though they're like pretty straightforward, there was something about their writing that I really liked, and I think there's a certain empathy that they have for their characters, and a certain there's a really great combination of like grittiness and heart with a lot of those authors that I really liked, and I think that was that was pretty inspiring to me, I think, as a writer, to try to capture that kind of thing.
People also mention, of course, the sentence craft of writers like that. Was that a concept that you were getting into explicitly about these guys, or was that something that came later? The way they write a sentence. Yeah,
I mean, I think one of the things about Southern writers is, the vernacular, the sort of the way they spin a phrase, or these expressions, or these kind of grammatical, regional grammatical tics that some of these people have. It was always really interesting to me, and I think I got just as much from the way they wrote as the stuff that they wrote about. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, another sentence writer. I never really thought about sentences that much when I would read those people. It was more just about the story, and maybe about the voice or whatever, of course, but. Because the narrators would often be these, eccentric Southern people. But another, when I first discovered writers like Gary Lutz, who is really probably my favorite story writer ever, his sentences are so great and unique and crazy and mind blowing. That's I don't know if I could ever aspire to write sentences like that, but it definitely, if you read stuff like that and other great sentence writers like Sam Lipsyte or Lainey Zumas, people like that, it does sink into your brain. So when you're telling stories and you're writing stories, then you do find yourself, using the same, some of their similar rhythms and stuff.
I think of the Southern writers you mentioned. I think of the collection you edited, Portland Noir. I think of A Common Pornography, and I get this common idea of a sense of place. I mean, how deliberately is a sense of place, important to you in your own literary consciousness, be it as a reader or a writer?
That's funny, because I've never really found that to be important to me.
It seems like it's there, but I somehow imagined you would say that it wasn't important. I don't quite know why, though.
Yeah, I mean, as a reader, I never really felt like it was important as a reader. In fact, I would sometimes get annoyed when I was reading something and there was too much detail about the setting or the room or the city or whatever. And so I don't know. It's weird. With my short stories, I've never really deliberately tried to talk about place. It's more about the stories and the characters. I think with A Common Pornography, it was pretty different, because I was trying to describe things in the Tri-Cities, and there were a few chapters in there where I wrote simply because I felt like I probably needed to describe certain things in the Tri-Cities, like the cable bridge and things like that. They're not the most interesting or important thing to me as a writer. But I like I said before when I was talking about Portland Noir, I've learned to appreciate that more. So I think, in the past few years, I probably do sneak in more references to things around, as far as place goes. And even the novel that I just finished, I mentioned places in Portland in the novel. So the novel takes place in Portland, and even the way I describe it to people, like when I wrote the book summary, when I submitted it, I said, this is about a couple in Portland, Oregon, and so I don't know how important that is to the finished product of the book. I mean, I think it's interesting for people to read stuff and say like, oh, I remember that place, and I think with A Common Pornography, like as far as like the feedback that I got from people, I did get a lot of feedback where people would say like, oh, you captured that place so well, and and it was really strange because I felt like I wasn't necessarily trying to sometimes, but people would get, it might just be like the power of suggestion, or like I'm sort of like maybe hinting at something, and then people sort of fill in the blanks for me or something.
I mean, reading it does seem to have a fairly thorough sense of place of the Tri-Cities, but by no means is it hugely detailed about the Tri-Cities. I don't know how much competition there is in Tri-Cities literature, but your book is certainly not a boosterist work of the Tri-Cities, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird when I grew up there. I didn't feel like it was a bad place. I kind of thought like, oh, this is a nice place to grow up because it's not like a tiny town and it's not like a big city. And it was sort of comforting in that way because it was just kind of like a medium place.
Right. Did you now think of it as a bad place?
Yeah, I do actually. I mean, when I go back, it's just I don't like these little towns where there's no distinct personality. It feels to me like when I go back there and drive around, it's just full of strip malls, chain restaurants, and houses that aren't being taken care of. Yeah. It's weird, like when you grow up in a place and you think, oh, this person, I had a friend that lived in that part of town, and that was the nice part of town, like up in the hills or whatever. Yeah, and then when you go back, like 10 years or later or whatever, and you drive through those areas, and you're like, I used to think this part of town was really nice, but I can see that it's just really junky now. Like nobody's painted their houses, or nobody mows their lawn, or I don't know. It's really weird.
It sounds like another one of those sort of platonic American nowheres that it's not very well kept up. You could probably go to a Claim Jumper or a TGI Fridays, but it's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in A Common Pornography, at the end of the book, when I talk about going back for my dad's funeral and stuff, I tried to, maybe hint at that a little bit. I mean, the fact that we went to, where was it? I can't remember what it's called. Not TGI Fridays, but in some place very similar to that.
In that league.
We went there, for dinner the night of the funeral or whatever, and it just seems like a funny place, I
remember you mentioning going to Sonic somewhere in the book.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, and that was just down the street from where my mom was living, and so we went there for our big talk afterwards. And so it's just these weird things. I mean, I don't know what the alternative would be. I mean, we could have gone to like, a nice family-owned restaurant or whatever, but there's so little of that there.
Right. Had you grown up in Portland, it would be a very different book, no doubt.
Oh yeah, I mean, if it was about growing up in Portland and coming back after years of being away and stuff, it would probably be different.
It always seems like a book that's partially about when you grew up, where you grew up, how you grew up, and about your own family as well. For the other part, that seems like one of those ideas that a writing instructor would say, well, it's relevant that's all relevant to you, how do you know it's relevant to the reader? And I guess how did you know your experiences would connect with readers? Because many are unusual, and the Tri-Cities are far afield. Maybe a lot of readers come from places like that, but you do. Was there deliberate thought put into, well, how am I gonna make this connectable, or was that an assumption and you worked from there?
Well, when I first wrote A Common Pornography, like the first version of A Common Pornography actually came out, like 8 years or 9 years or whatever before, no, like 7 years before the longer HarperCollins version. The first version was just this little 60-page version that I put out. And, it was like, I didn't really know. I mean, it was so different from my fiction writing because it was a little bit more like straight ahead and sort of unstylized. It was, I would just try to tell these really simple little stories about my childhood and these little memories. And, it was like a memory experiment. I would just try to write about as many memories as I could. And so, when you're writing about memories, a lot of times it's just these short little things, and, and they're just these little simple things that happen. And I didn't really know. I put it out thinking, well, this is weird for me. I'll call it a memoir because they're all true stories or whatever. But like, I don't really know if it's really like what a memoir is supposed to be. Right. I don't know if anyone's going to care. They're just these simple little stories, and some of them are just kind of trivial and they don't go anywhere. But they're true life, and I think a lot of people, when they have memories, and people have these memories of things that they did when they were kids, and they're things that don't have like big impacting endings or anything like that, but they're like these fond, funny, nostalgic memories that they have, and just these little simple things. So I put out that version, and when it came out, I printed like 500 or 600 copies of it on future tense, and I really just I really didn't have any idea, but so many people liked it. I was sort of taken aback. That's an example. Going back to your previous question, that's a good example of something that I didn't really, think was going to be a big deal.
Maybe the main example.
Yeah, it may be. But a lot of people really liked it, and a lot of people responded and said, like, oh, I wanted it to be longer, and like I really enjoyed the stuff, and it reminded me of like things I did when I was a kid, or stories when I was a kid. And so I thought, maybe I should expand it. And so like, through the years I would write little things and kind of put them in this, folder on my computer, not really knowing if it would be, come out as an expanded version. And it wasn't until my dad passed away when I learned about all these other things, and then I felt compelled to write about some of these other things and some of the family secrets and kind of tell more family story, and also it made me feel like I should dig deeper into my own stuff, and so I did that too. And I think I was validated by the first version of the book because people responded to it so well, and so that gave me a little more confidence that people would like them, even if they were really simple, just funny stories. So yeah, I just felt like I just wrote them. I think just the reaction from people initially from the first version, and because some of the stuff I added into the longer version was more, maybe actually a little more like disturbing and shocking. I felt like it was a good mix of like these sort of simple, mundane life stories and these kind of shocking things, and the mix of those things I hoped would come together for some sort of like interesting reading experience. So it's been really rewarding to hear a lot of people talk about how much they relate to it. Yeah, it's really strange.
The book does avoid becoming the standard shocking family secrets confessional for the reasons you describe. And also, I mean, the formal qualities of it have fascinated me a lot. The short chapters, short sentences, some almost fragmentary chapters that accrete into one longer work. You mentioned that the new novel does similar things formally?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the new book. I think it probably has a little bit more of a conversational sort of like maybe even more of an intimate feel to it in a way. I think some of the style that I used in A Common Pornography was sort of this no style, and I think it was kind of stripped of A Common Pornography is kind of stripped of like emotional verbiage and stuff like that. So it has a sort of a cold sheen to it, I think, which kind of works for a lot of people and sometimes doesn't work. Like some of the criticism I got about the book was that people felt like that it was kind of this cold narrative, but it worked for a lot of people. So you know, you can't really have it both ways. For the book, it's a guy writing and he's referring to the woman as you, and so it has this, you know, it's like you and I do this, and you and I were here and we talked about this, and so it has a much more intimate feel, and but it is also very short chapters and personal stuff. But there's a little bit more warmth to it, but it can be equally blunt, I think, as the memoir, and I like having that sort of bluntness in the writing too, I think.
What does writing with those short chapters do for your writing process?
I think it just, for me, it's something that just makes it easier for me. It's easier to get in and out of something. I don't have a ton of time to write. I don't have like a set schedule. I don't write, a certain number of hours every day or anything like that. So when I was working on the memoir and when I was working on the book I just finished, like I would just have a couple of days a week, and oftentimes it would be like, sometimes half an hour, or sometimes it'd be for 3 or 4 hours. It was just easier for me to think of things in those sort of short vignettes. I am gonna try to move away from that style and go into longer chapters and stuff with future writings. And I have written, stories that are longer, and I've written essays that are a little bit longer and stuff. So I'm not averse to doing that. But I think I do have an affinity for writing things that are short and direct. And I enjoy reading stuff like that too. So, I don't know.
Having logged 20 years here in Portland, you've got investment in the place, but what keeps you here as a writer? I mean, what about Portland? What about being a writer in Portland? About Portland writing, if we can call it that, is particularly attractive or advantageous, do you think?
Well, I think even like in the last couple of years, it's gotten even better. There's a lot of writers coming out with stuff that have made big impacts.
Who's exciting you here right now to read?
Well, some of the obvious people to mention would be, Lydia Yuknavitch, Cheryl Strayed. I mean, they're both people who have had an enormous amount of attention, but rightfully so. Their stuff is so is so visceral and so impacting and so emotionally impacting when you read it. Maybe it's just my reading habits of the last year or so, but I've really sort of gravitated to more like emotional sort of human stories like that. But so they're a good, they're a really exciting part of what's happening here now. There are writers who are moving here that are already good writers. Lainey Zumas came here this last year. She just put out a novel called The Listeners. That's one of my favorite books this year. There's, I'm friends with a bunch of other writers who I really, really love here. There's a great poetry scene, which is really exciting here. Zachary Schomburg, Donald Dunbar, Emily Kendall Fry. There's a lot of other fiction writers, Paul Tatongi. There's people who've been here for a long time that are still producing great stuff. It's always nice to see like Tom Spanbauer out and about, and like Catherine Dunn. These like local people who've been around for a long time, but they're still here contributing and doing great stuff, and it's just a really supportive scene too. A lot of the writers that live here are really supportive of each other, and it's really cool. It's really mixed too. You'll have like nonfiction writers who are really good friends with poets, and it's a good. There's a lot of good mixing and matching of really cool writing going on.
I don't know how much you can speak to it, but it seems like Portland being distant from, say, the New York literary world, it lets you go about becoming a writer your own way, in a sense. You're not really tracked into any specific pathway to become whatever writer you want to be. Does that make sense?
Well, I think when you are living in Portland, it's a much easier place to live. Probably it's cheaper. People can get around and can not stress out about having rent money or whatever. As opposed to like New York, where rents are pretty high for smaller places, and people often have to work like more than a couple of jobs, and a lot of people here that are writing and living here is people who have part-time jobs and live in a big house and just pay a couple $100 for rent each month or whatever. I know a few people like that.
It seems like one of the last cities where that's possible in terms of major cities where there's cultural stuff going on.
Yeah, so I just think people have the ability or the time or the space where they can do more creative stuff, and to produce more creative stuff, whether it be books or readings or plays or shows. Like people, like I said, people are really supportive of each other. So if you came here and did something, read at a reading series, people actually get excited and they come out and they see like the new people or the old standbys or what have you. Whereas if you go someplace like New York or maybe LA or San Francisco or even Seattle, it's like I feel like the scene is maybe more scattered and maybe not as connected. Where it seems like the people are more connected here, the different kinds of writers, and it's really easy to meet people here. People are friendly, and people want to show you around Portland and tell you about things that are happening. And I think sometimes maybe in other cities it's a little bit more competitive, and writers are maybe more, maybe not jealous, but there's a certain lack of connection in some other places.
And what has it given you as a setting for the new novel, Portland? Anything particularly interesting, or is it's the place you are and thus it became the place you set the novel?
I think it's just, the place I am, and because I was trying to make something that seemed really authentic and real, as true to life as anything. I wanted it to seem as real as the memoir. In fact, I'm sure that when it does come out in whatever form, that some people will probably, mistake it for a memoir. Maybe, that just happens. I think sometimes when you write fiction and nonfiction, people get confused. But I just used it because I wanted it to have these certain reminders. Like, I think when people read stuff, they see these things about places or bars or streets in their city, and it does make it seem more real. Even in a work of fiction, it gives people a clearer vision of what you're talking about.
Verisimilitude, I suppose. I'm trying to think of what the word would be for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I've been speaking in Portland's Montavilla neighborhood with Kevin Sampsell. He is the publisher of Future Tense Books. He's the author of books including Beautiful Blemish, Creamy Bullets, and A Common Pornography, and a new one which will be coming out maybe in a year, maybe sometime in the future. They can keep updated with that on your site, though, correct?
Yeah, for sure.
It's kevinsampsell.com. There we go. Never quite sure about that because I type it into the Google window every time. Kevin, thanks so much for taking the time today.
All right, thank you very much.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to everyone who backed this season on Kickstarter: Danny Bolson, Brad and Laramie on Movies, Paul Doyle, Umberto Grant, Matt Howie, Andrew Hovanek, Mark Hines, Mary Gillander, Eric Graham, Will Graham, John French, Andrew Philippon Jr., Kimberly Hahn, Chris Kay, Andy Cooney, Mark Larson, Rebecca O'Malley, Michael O'Regan, Gail Poole, Blake Riley, Superfan Giovanni, Aidan Nullman, Adam Schaefer, Rob Schultz, Scott Schenker, Cam Smith, Kevin Smokler, Adam Sutherland, TSD, Thomas Unterberger, Matt Warren, and Wayne Wright.